So how long do you think it takes you to find something? You know, you misplaced the car keys, you misplaced something else. There's this, how much time do you think you spend? Well, I found this infographic, and lots of things we lose. We spend about 5 minutes and 20 seconds looking for different items. And these are the things, spend more than 15 minutes looking for. 21% look for our house keys. 20% wallets, umbrella, credit cards, driver's license. We have all these things that tend to get misplaced, and they become missing in action. And so here's another infographic for you. Just again, 45% we look for our TV remotes. In my house, I don't even know, I start in one place and I know it's not going to be there, but then again, it takes me another 15 minutes and the show's halfway over. But that's okay. So we have these items that get lost. We have these things that we just wonder, where did it go? Where did this, I had it here, but now it's gone. And if we think about that, we're looking still at the dawn of a new day, looking at a new year, looking at some of those resolutions, looking at some of those things that we can do. And we wonder, where did it go? Where did that habit go? How did it get formed? Or where did that fire that I once had? When January 2nd came around and you were at the gym, or you were eating right, or you were opening up your Bible, and all of a sudden it's now 3 weeks into it. 19 days. Where did it go? We're going to look at Ezekiel today, and Ezekiel was a prophet, just follows Jeremiah. Jeremiah, we talked about a couple weeks ago, he was a very sad prophet, and he watched his friends be taken into captivity, to be enslaved. He watched some of his friends die. He watched his world around him crumble, and he talked about the new mercies of God, the God's promises that come each day. Well, Ezekiel was the one after Jeremiah. And he's talking to a people that live far away from their hometown. And he keeps telling them about these different things. He keeps telling them about the forgiveness they can have. He keeps telling them that God wants them back, and God's desire is to be with them, and that there's going to be a new thing coming. And this morning we're going to look at chapter 36, verses 26 through 28. And will you read this word with me? He says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Then you will live in the land I gave your ancestors. You will be my people, and I will be your God. See, this is God sharing that with Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's taking this message and he's telling the people who have no hope. And he's letting them know that God still sees them. Verse 25, as I was researching this, I should have put in verse 25. Verse 25 says that God says that I will cleanse your heart. I will sprinkle water on your heart and open this up. Well, why the water on the heart? Because our hearts are stone. Our hearts are hardened. And I'm going to share a few words about this hardened heart, and you're going to say, oh no, that's not me. But really, let's look at ourselves for a minute, because they may not all be true, but there's a good portion of them that could be. So a heart of stone, this is some of the things: uncaring, unforgiving, cold, self-centered. Well, no, that's not me. I care about people. How far do you care? How far do you care? Do you care enough to stand out in the cold and open the doors? Do you care enough to see your neighbor who's struggling and shoveling their sidewalk on a day like yesterday, or a night like last night when it's raining, to help them out? Unforgiving, oh, I forgive. Do we? Do we really forgive people of their mistakes? Or when we see them, do we see those mistakes? Do we see that pain that they caused? Well, I'm not cold, I'm warm, I'm open, I'm laughing, I'm smiling. Are you? Or is that just with the people that you like? And there's that word self-centered. Focusing on just my needs. I will admit, this is that confession time. I have a heart of stone. There are times when this heart really weighs heavy. And I bet if you're honest with yourself, that you too can see that heart of stone. But the beauty of Ezekiel's words, the beauty of what God is doing in our life, the beauty of Jesus is that He doesn't want us to have that heart of stone. He wants us to have a heart of flesh. A heart that's beating within us. A heart that beats like God's heart. A heart that sees people as God sees them. A heart that isn't as hard and it isn't as stoned and it isn't as compacted. And a heart of flesh is a little different. A heart of flesh looks like this. It's tender. It's that person crying in the movie or crying as a speech is given or that tender that just is open. Vulnerable. That continues to put themselves out there even though they know that they could be hurt. Even though that the world can come crashing in, they still step in and say, you know what, I care. Forgiving. This is the difficult one. This is the one that really, I think, really gets to us the most because it's hard. It's hard work to forgive someone else. It's hard work to say that what you did or what you said or what I've done, that I can release you from that. That I can release you from that pain and that hurt. I can release you from that wrong that was done. So that when I see you, I don't see that wrong. I see you. That's hard work. Because we really have a hard time with that. And that heart of flesh sees other people as God sees them. Sees them as souls that are worthy, as lives that are valuable, as people, not objects. As beings that we can walk together with instead of beings that I can step on to get to my goal. That heart of flesh is really one that we really want to get to. But if we're going to be honest and we're going to be open, there are times where we're in both worlds, right? We kind of look like this. That heart of flesh is in there. But that stone is encased. That stone continues to hold us deeper and deeper. And we live in that in-between world. We live in that spectrum. And sometimes we're soft. And sometimes we care. And we're working to let go. And we're working to forgive. And we can feel that tenderness. And we can feel our heartstrings. But there are times where we just step away. And if we look at the people Ezekiel was talking to, and we look at their lives, and we go into that moment of time, they are just like us. They're in that in-between. They know what God's calling them to do. They know what God has suggested for them. Or not even suggested, how about the word command? That this is how you're to live. But they're in pain. And in pain, we really start hardening our heart because we don't want to feel that pain. We don't want that to be, that pain to continue to be a part of our life. And Jesus says, or God says, that I will sprinkle that heart with water. And I will pour my blessing out upon that heart. And that heart of stone will begin to crack. And I will give you a new heart, a heart of flesh. Not only will I give you a new heart, but I will give you a new spirit. A spirit that's looking for more. A spirit that is searching for something deeper. A spirit that's searching for me. Is what God says. That you'll follow what I have for you. And we may have to take a moment back and say, well, what does God have for us? How do I look into that? How do I get there? And I think it begins I'll back up, because we have a choice. We have that heart of stone or that heart of flesh. And we live in between those two worlds, and Jesus continues to call us into something better, into that heart of flesh. I got Hall of Justice running through my head. The Justice League is there. But we have this heart. And God is continuing to bring us into a deeper relationship. And He has ways for us to get there. He has ways for us to have that heart of stone taken out and that heart of flesh put in. And I think, how do we get there? I think the first step is that we have to be observant. We have to look at what's going on around us. We have to notice when that heart, our heart, begins to get hardened again. We have to look and see that what is going on. As Jesus was there with the disciples, and they were up in the mountains far away from any food source, and the people are saying, there's a lot of people, there's 5,000 plus, and they're saying we're hungry. And the disciples say, hey Jesus, they're hungry, you should send them away. And Jesus says, no. Don't send them away. You feed them. Don't let your heart be hardened. You give them food. And the disciples, in their mindset, because we'd be in the same mindset, well, what food can we give? We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's not even enough to feed us 13, let alone the 5,000 plus that are here. What do we do? But Jesus, I think, was actually, He would perform the miracle and feed them, but He was trying to get His disciples to see them. Not see them as people who were just there to make them feel good, but see them as people who had needs, to see them as people with heart, to see them as people who needed, loved, and needed to be heard, and had their needs met. Because sometimes if we're not observant, if we don't see what's going on around us and we don't notice our own heart, we'll become like disciples. Well, someone else will take care of them. Someone else will help them out. And we miss out looking at what Jesus is calling us to do. We miss out on that flesh heart, that soft heart, that tenderness. And it's just not being observant. I think Jesus says also for us to have empathy. And now empathy is one of those words that sometimes we lose sight of. Empathy means that I'm going to put myself in your place. And I'm going to walk in your shoes. Which I realize we can't really do unless we have that experience. And even our experience will be different than someone else's experience. But if we don't walk in someone else's shoes for a little bit of time, if we don't put ourselves in their place, how would I feel? What would I do? We end up like the Pharisees. As you read the Gospels and you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament, you begin to see Jesus always pounding on the Pharisees. Well, why is He pounding on them? Because they've lost touch. Jesus tells them, He says, you continue to give them commands which you don't even live up to. It's like putting a millstone around their neck and not taking that burden off. Millstone, if you don't know, is a big rock that they would use to grind the grain to make flour. Had to be pretty heavy. Usually took an oxen to make it rotate and move to ground the grain. And Jesus is telling the Pharisees, that's what you're putting on people. That weight, that expectation, it's heavy. Why? Because they couldn't be empathetic. The Pharisees could not put themselves in the shoes of the people they were talking to. No wonder, as the Pharisees would say, the sinners didn't want to be around them, and they didn't want to be around the sinners. The sinners being normal people. The sinners being the tax collectors, the sinners being those who didn't follow the law, those who didn't go to church, those who didn't live up to the expectations, those who didn't have all the rules and memorize them and follow them every day. The Pharisees didn't want to see them and know them. They didn't want that empathy. They wanted to be where they were, proud and something else. I'll tell you later, Terry, because you'll like this one. Proud and just this smugness about them. Because that's where they wanted to be. I am better than you. And if I carry that attitude that I'm better than you, I'm not going to be empathetic. I'm not going to put myself in your shoes. I'm not going to walk around thinking, if I didn't have shoes on today, what would I do? If I didn't have breakfast this morning, how would I react? If my life was so hard that I had to turn to an escape an escape all the time, I don't understand. If I had empathy is one of those things that sometimes we totally forget about. And we as people of God, we as followers of Jesus, we have one of the most empathetic persons right in front of us. Jesus, the Son of God, who was with God, who is God, left heaven to be on earth. Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus walking a mile in our shoes, facing the same temptations we face, facing the struggles of the world, and having compassion. Think about the woman that committed adultery, and as she was brought before the crowd and whatever she had with her, and the Pharisees and the religious leaders are standing there with the rocks ready to throw stones at her until she died. That's just not you can think of it as a literal image, but you can also think it as a figurative image. As some of us are those elders and those religious leaders holding our rock, ready to pound someone who isn't following the same rules that we follow. And Jesus is sitting playing in the dirt and looks up and says, "Hey, you who haven't done anything wrong, go ahead and throw that first rock. Chuck it at her." Goes back to playing in the sand. And as they all left, Jesus is there, and you got to hear his words where as they all left, he says to the woman, he looks her in the eye and he says, "Hey, is there no one here to condemn you? Is there no one here to throw rocks at you? Is there no one who doesn't understand where you are and what you've done?" And she says, "There's no one here." Because all those religious leaders, all those people that had rocks in their hands, knew that they had done something wrong at one point or time in their life. And Jesus is the only one who could throw a rock at her. Jesus stood up and says, "Neither do I." Because he understood. He had walked a mile in her shoe. He had come from the perfect and holiness of God and walked this earth and lived this life, and says, "I'm not able to condemn you either. In fact, I forgive you. I no longer see what it was you have done. I see you. I no longer hold you accountable. I no longer hold that sin against you. I no longer hold that mistake against you. I release you from it." We have that new heart. We have that new fleshly heart within us, that we can do the same thing. But it's hard. And we also, that forgiveness. Man, it's a difficult life to live. It's a difficult life to live, to hold on to that grudge. It's a difficult life to live, turning people aside because of their mistakes. If Jesus were not forgiving, if Jesus were to hold us, hold all of our sins against us, man, we'd all be wiped out. Maybe on a daily basis, sometimes in the heat of the moment, probably a second by second basis. But this promise that Ezekiel was given, a promise that he shares with the people that are far away from God at that moment, that they have a new heart, that he's going to take out that heart of stone and put in this heart of flesh. It was a process that they were living into. And then it's the same process that we're living into, because Jesus is still working in our life. Even when we make that mistake, even when we fall back into that hardened heart and we're not as tender, we're not as kind, we're not as forgiving, Jesus says, here's another opportunity. You're forgiven. And I will continue to be with you, and I'll give you that new heart and that new spirit, and we'll walk together down this path, and I will continue to give you the opportunities. Opportunities to trust me, Jesus says. Opportunities to feel this empathy, to feel this love, to have this new heart. Opportunities to express it. To let it go. And it brings us back to this moment. Because it's not something that is forced upon us. It is not, God just doesn't say, hey, I see you there. I see you, and I'm going to take out your heart, rip it out. I'm going to give you this new heart and put it back in. It's not how God works. God says it's your choice. Are you going to have a heart of stone or a heart of flesh? Are you going to walk closer and grow into that heart of flesh, where you're going to have that moment to have that expression of love? You're going to have that tenderness. You're going to have that empathy. You're going to have that forgiveness. Or do you want to harden that heart? I love Joshua's words at the end of Joshua. He gives us this opportunity, and he shares these things with the people of God that he's surrounded by. He says, you can choose who you're going to worship, and you can choose of where you're going to be. But Joshua says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And that's a question right now for you. As for you, we can't usually speak for our house anymore, because we realize that there are people there that have their own thoughts and opinions. But as for you, which heart will you have? And when you misplace that heart, when you misplace that heart of flesh, and you find that heart of stone in its spot, will you go searching for that heart of flesh? Will you watch and say, where did it go? And seek out Jesus and his forgiveness and Jesus and his love? And start working once again and following him to let that heart of flesh come back? Because it's easy to have a heart of stone in our day and age. It's easy to push others aside. It's easy to get caught up into the words that divide. It's easy to throw people away. Will you do the hard work? It is the dawn of a new day.